Well, I've been locked up for quite a while now on this self quarantine. I did get out this morning for coffee. Last night, I spent most of the evening watching various protests from around the country. I also watched the movie where the police murdered the citizen in Minneapolis. There's some curious things happening that didn't happen during the Vietnam or civil rights protests. One of the things that really impressed me this morning was reading about the fact that the transit workers in Minneapolis were not going to cooperate and transport arrestees from protests to the police department or jail or whatever they were going to bring them to or take them to. This is really curious. It showed union activity, and it's the same union as represents the police, which is doubly interesting. But it also occurred to me that we've really got some dumbass officials in charge. The protesters, after being locked up on the quarantine for a while and things like that, sit at their TV sets and they watch a deliberate murder of one of their own. They're pissed off. So they go out and they peacefully protest. Now, think of it, if you're in business, and governments now claim to be business and use a business model, somebody comes into your store and says, this suit doesn't fit. Do you say, get out of here and shove it? Or do you take the suit and take your gun and force him out of the store? Or if he starts a disagreeable conversation and it escalates because of your intransigent attitude, do you call the police and say this guy's making a disturbance? Well, some merchants would do that, but look at what would happen. If you're a merchant and you depend on retail sales, if you're a total asshole, you're not going to get any sales back. You're not going to get any customers back. So what you try to do is you try to placate them. Now, what does Minneapolis do? Or Minnesota? The government calls out the National Guard. These people are crying out for something. They're hurt, they're frustrated, and they don't think anybody's listening to them. They have the same complaint decade after decade after decade. And what happens? You call out the police. What they really want is they want the legislators, even if nothing is accomplished, to call something akin to an emergency session, saying, we've got a real problem here. What are we going to do about it? Or maybe the town council. We have got a police department that's out of control. You don't say, well, we've got a police department that's barbaric, stupid, and out of control, and let's use them to control crowds that are protesting, just to show them who's boss. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm a stubborn bastard, and I'd get pissed off, and I'd probably go out and protest after that. The response of government on these instances is totally idiotic and irresponsible. The public is protesting because they want somebody to notice that they have a grievance. The Constitution says you can assemble and protest and petition your government for redress of grievances. Well, we're not getting any redress of grievances. We're getting rubber bullets, gas bombs, tear gas, smoke grenades, things like that. You're getting a military presence when you shouldn't be getting a military presence. What you need is community organizers, mental health workers, people like that to go into the crowd and say, we feel your pain. We're going to try to do something about it. But no, we don't. We use power. It reminds me back in the 60s, there was a lot of protest in the 60s. That's where I started out in the movement politics with SDS and others. Well, nobody paid attention to us then. And you take an incident like Kent State, instead of saying, what's the problem? They sent out the National Guard, who end up shooting a few students for target practice or whatever. But you did get some response in the government. You had some congressmen and senators saying, let's investigate this, let's check on this. And even though the right-wing media and the right-wingers in the country were proposing law and order, there were some rational views. Now, Nixon capitalized on all of that unrest and went on the law and order platform and won an election on that. But you say how long he stayed. At that time, there was all kinds of studies from the 50s and 60s about militarization of the police. And actually, some places took note of the research. For instance, Lakewood, Colorado read the latest research on the problem and on the subject and sent out an order that the policemen would wear blazers instead of military type uniforms. Well, this is a good idea as far as public relations are concerned and as far as dealing with the public is concerned. However, a lot of these insecure, immature, wannabe soldier policemen took offense that they didn't get to wear uniforms and things like this. They wanted to show militarism. They wanted to show who's boss. They were angry themselves. They were angry at the fact that people weren't doing their so-called patriotic duty and protesting the war. So there's a big dichotomy there, but at least we had some debate going. What do we see now? Well, we got a bunch of black people out there, they're pissed off because we're murdering them. Well, let's go murder more and teach them a lesson. That's absolutely ridiculous. When you got a president saying, well, let's shoot them, or when you arrest somebody, forget to put your hand on their head, or let's rough them up a little bit, or saying something like, why don't you fire the son of a bitch whenever a football player wants to protest. Meeting reasonable demands with unreasonable force shouldn't be in our behavioral lexicon. It's irrational and it's punitive, and all it is a knee-jerk reaction to things without any thought. Now, I will also state that when we lacked education in core values and in core knowledge, things went to hell quicker. Now we got this woman, Betsy Voss, wanting to privatize everything. And what that's going to do is turn the whole education system into a trade school for the benefit of the rich son of bitches that want to exploit us. I think that's unacceptable, and I think we should stand up against that. But mainly we should stand up against idiocy. We should stand up against bigotry. We should stand up for education. We should stand up for positive reactions to protest. We should stand up for rationality. I personally think one of the few remedies, and I've said this in several of my other writings and things like that, is we've got to demilitarize the police. We can't have trade shows where military equipment is sold to the police. We can't give the police money to buy military equipment to use against the citizenry. That's wrong, intellectually, morally, and constitutionally, I think. We are not the enemy, but we're treated like the enemy. In fact, if we don't salute the police and bow down to them, we're the enemy. The people are the enemy. They refer to us as civilians or others or whatever. We don't have the band of brothers bound together by murder and violence and pushing our weight around. And I think this is wrong, and it's time that we do something about it. When you hear a police justify brutality or even murder by saying we're following our training, that's bullshit. We got to look at who's training and what kind of training is it. For years, I've traveled around the world talking to various police administrators. One of the more interesting ones I've talked to was a group of bobbies, policemen, in Birmingham, England. Birmingham's a rough town, working class town. They have a few riots every now and then with their soccer games. And I was talking to one Bobby, he's a policeman, and he mentioned the fact that, well, one of the people I was with said, well, what do you do if you got a drunk or they're unruly or whatever? You know, they were talking about why they don't carry guns. And this officer, about 45, 50 years old, said, if I can't handle a drunk with my billy club, or my baton, he called it, I'll resign. And you look at enforcement throughout the world, and it's not a militaristic response, except for in fascist police states like China at Tiananmen Square and things like this, places like that. But one of the things that I got reminded of when I read about the strike of the transport workers and refusal to haul passengers or protesters in their buses reminded me of the Potemkin incident in Russia, where the military refused to attack and didn't follow orders of attacking the citizens, which was the start of the Russian Revolution. And I think we've got to be very careful about that, because I really believe that if we don't start reacting appropriately to people with legitimate grievances, they're going to be like the French. They're going to break out the guillotines, and it doesn't matter whether you're a good guy or a bad guy. If you're of a certain class or whatever, you have an equal chance of losing your head. And I view myself as one of the good guys, not one of the bad guys. But I will say this: virus, disease, and revolutions don't really give a damn. They're irrational. And I don't think that irrational action should be addressed with irrational militarization. And I hope a lot of you agree with me. Even if you don't agree with me, I hope you respond to this. I like feedback. I like to see if I'm getting to people or not getting to people. Whether I'm getting under your skin or getting to your intellect doesn't matter to me. I just want to know how this affects. And frankly, I say a few things that I just do deliberately in order to get people thinking. My job here is to stimulate thought. Thank you for watching. Bye.